Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of September of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from the city of Starokonstantinov. If you remember, just yesterday we were talking about the airfield to the east of the city, and according to information we have, yesterday the Russians attacked the territory of the airfield with the use of 3 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, and as a result of yesterday's attacks, according to different sources, the Russians managed to destroy up to 5 F-16s. Yet we haven't received anything that can confirm this, but obviously very interesting situation. And today, on the 27th of September, this evening, the Russian forces attacked the same airfield with the use of 4 hypersonic missiles Kinzhal. And the sources are saying that as a result of today's attack, the Russians managed to destroy up to 3 F-16s. Once again, yet we haven't received anything that can confirm this, but obviously 7 hypersonic missiles Kinzhal in the same direction is a very interesting piece of news. Now let's move further and let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the stronghold of Vuhledar. Very interesting situation is developing here. The most important that during the previous day, since the beginning of the morning of the 27th of September, telling the truth, we haven't received anything. We haven't received anything about additional Russian progress. We haven't received anything about some assault operations or very poor situation for the Ukrainian armed forces, and this is a very important piece of news. You know that I was analyzing the battle for Vuhledar since the beginning of the battle, since the moment when the Russians reached the outskirts of the city, and let's discuss this in details once again. So let's start from the 25th of September, when the Russians managed to enter the citadel itself. And as you can see, according to information we have and according to the geolocations we were receiving during the day, we see that the Russians were bombing and attacking the citadel heavily with the use of flamethrower systems, with different multiple launch rocket systems, with aviation, with just FPV drones. So the entire city, the entire citadel was set on fire. Significant number of geolocations, significant number of videos that confirm this. As for the 26th of September, we are talking about the yesterday, we haven't received anything from the direction of Vuhledar. We got just one video from the northern tree line, and in this video, according to the author of this video, the Russian flamethrower drones were attacking the Ukrainian positions that were located along this tree line. So this is the only geolocation that we received yesterday. Anyway, this geolocation confirms some clashes at least around the city and along the city. And as for the 27th of September, we're talking about the current date, we haven't received anything about artillery strikes, about aviation strikes. We haven't received anything, and we see that the Russians change their tactics, change the quality of their offensive, the type, the state of their offensive from massive artillery strikes to the most important, negotiation. Now let's discuss in details. We have just one important geolocation from this territory. This geolocation is coming from the northern part, and we were talking that the night between the 26th and the 27th of September was the best time for the Ukrainians, if they can, if they want, to escape the encirclement and to run away on their feet in the northern direction towards the village of Bogoyavlenka. But the Russians, of course, are not stupid. They know everything. They know exactly what the Ukrainians were planning to do. So during the previous night, the Russians were bombing the northern Vuhledar with lightning shells, with thermobaric shells, with the purpose to block these roads, to block this area for evacuation and for escaping of the cauldron. And as for the 27th of September, we got 2 geolocations, lots of icons, but most of them are about one thing: the negotiation process and Russian suggestion, fair suggestion to Ukrainians to surrender. For example, in this video we can see once again Russian soldier who was describing what was draw or what was located on these small lists that the Russians were spreading and dropping in the Vuhledar. In this video we can see another batch of lists that were spread between the buildings, between the Ukrainian positions, and once again in this list the Ukrainians might find a short instruction how they can surrender. I'll remind you that there are around 1,500 1,500 soldiers that are blocked in the basements and in the buildings of Vuhledar. Obviously, they don't have chances to break through the encirclement. They don't have chances to survive if they decide to fight or if they decide to run in the northern direction. So, and this is another reason why the Russians didn't attack Vuhledar. This is another reason why the Russians still haven't raised the flag in the western part, in the northern part. And once again, the reason is that Ukrainians have no chances to escape Vuhledar. The Ukrainians have no chances to break through the encirclement. The Ukrainians have no chances to save these 1,500 soldiers. So the Russians decided, so what is the reason? There is no need to rush. There is no need to rush. Ukrainians have no chances. They have no other way just to surrender, or they will stay between the ruins of Vuhledar forever. And that's why for Putin and for Russian military authorities, the best solution is to show media victory, to show big videos as we used to see in Azovstal when the significant number of Ukrainian soldiers surrendered, when we see convoys of Ukrainians who were leaving the Mariupol under the Russians in the convoys, under the Russian control. So now the Russians wants to do the same. We know that there are 72nd Mechanized Brigade, very motivated, highly motivated soldiers. Most of them are considered as a war criminals according to the Russians. So that's why for them it's the best option, despite the fact that if the situation will take the Russians 1 week or 2 weeks of siege with this negotiation process, anyway, the Ukrainians sooner or later will stay without water and without food. And when they will get this situation, they will surrender, obviously. And the thing is that the reason why the Ukrainians were encircled is, of course, Zelensky and his political decision. We know that Zelensky still in New York, in the United States of America. During the previous few days, he had a meeting with Kamala Harris, with Joe Biden. Today, he had a meeting with Donald Trump, the former president of the United States of America, and he was talking about the peace plan and he was providing details. And today we got a few notes from the meeting between Zelensky and Trump. Zelensky says he wants to discuss with Trump details of his victory plan for Ukraine. Trump says Ukraine war has to end at some point. Trump says if elected, he will work with both parties towards a settlement to Ukraine war. Trump says has a very good relations with Zelensky and Russia's Putin too. So this is the situation. As you can see, Trump is not going to continue the special military operation, according at least Trump's words. What is going to be in reality, we will see probably, but maybe probably within 4 months. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kurakhove direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And today, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to answer the city of Gornyak. Today, the Russian sources published the flag in the most northern part of the town, and this flag confirms complete control over at least this part of the town. The first updates, the first reports that the Russians managed to take under control the northern part, we got from neutral mappers on the 21st of September. And just today, on the 27th of September, so 6 days later, we got the real proofs that confirm this. Furthermore, today, we got significant number of geolocations and icons to the south of Gornyak. For example, in this video we can see very powerful Russian artillery strikes on this part of the town, which confirms that the Russians are about to move further in the southern direction. The Russians destroyed most likely some temporary point or maybe some headquarters or some ammo depot in the vicinity of the landfill and the tericon of the mine by the name of Kurakhove. Furthermore, in the southern direction we see the main supply road, and this is the road that Ukrainians are using to support their forces. The road is going along the railways further in the southwestern direction, and the Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over this territory. Just during the previous day, we got significant number of videos of how the Russians were attacking and destroying the vehicles, Ukrainian vehicles that were moving to supply and support forces in Gornyak. And once again, we remember the rule: if we see Russian drone focus in some point, that means that the Russians are moving in the same direction. So this is the situation and this is the reality. Most likely within the next 7 days, the town of Gornyak will be captured completely, and this is going to be a complete disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine, at least in this part of Kurakhove direction. Now let's talk about Selydove direction. The Selydove direction, today we got two important updates. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Marinovka. So now we got more or less reliable confirmation that the territory was captured by the Russians. I'll remind you that most of the mappers adjusted their maps in the village of Marinovka in Russian favor probably months ago. First, we were keeping this territory as a contested area according to different mappers. Later, we turned this territory back under complete Ukraine control. And today we got the final confirmation from the Ministry of Defense, and we colored this territory in Russian favor. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours were trying to counterattack to save control over the village, but most of the reinforcement was destroyed during the, let's say, redeployment process as a result of FPV drone attacks. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. We have lots of updates. The Russians, yes, they took under control the stronghold by the name of Guitar and established control over the 50% of the village of Mykolaievka. Today we got additional geolocations, additional confirmations from different mappers, and some videos how Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russians, but as a result of Russian FPV drone attacks, every single attempt was ruined. Anyway, we see that the Russians are moving. The Russians are moving in the direction of Mirnograd, and we need to understand one important thing. Despite the current situation in Selydove, despite the current situation in Gornyak and Kurakhove and Vuhledar, the Russians understand that before winter comes, before the real colds are coming, the Russians, despite any losses, difficulties, and many other barriers in front of them, they need to take under control the southern part of Mirnograd. The Ukrainians also understand this, because when winter comes, it's better to have some buildings, some constructions, basements, some foothold below your hands, below your legs, and if the Russians are not able to take Mirnograd, or at least this part of Mirnograd before winter comes, most likely they will not be able to begin the Pokrovsk offensive operation until the next summer. If the Russians are able to take some foothold in Mirnograd, then they will be able to have some foothold for further developments, and maybe the Russians will be able to take the city of Pokrovsk by the beginning of the summer. Not to begin, but to end this operation. So that's why during the next 2 months we're going to see significant number of clashes in this area, and the Russians will try to take the initiative and this foothold. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction, because we received significant number of updates from this territory as well. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for this dense network of the fortifications. We've been talking a lot about this territory for the previous few days, and we will continue doing this the same, because another day in a row we are receiving a significant number of geolocations exactly from the Russian side of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians here. For example, in this video we can see some vehicles, some personnel that was attacked by the Russians by FPV drone during the night period of time. Then we got another video how the Russians, as a result of Kurakhove operation, discovered another group of Ukrainians, and then the Russians attacked them with FPV drones. And for example, yesterday we got few more geolocations from the same part. So all these geolocations are saying just one thing: the Russians are trying to move further in the western direction with the purpose to reach the town and this village of Sukhaya Balka, and the Ukrainians are doing everything they can to slow the Russians down. Now let's talk about Toretsk. During the previous 24 hours we got at least 3 geolocations that make us to change the map. For example, in this video we can see a video was published by the Ukrainians by 100th Mechanized Brigade. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian forces in this part of Toretsk. There are a lot of episodes, a lot of geolocations, some of them were geolocated. One of the episodes took place exactly in this point, and based on this video we have adjusted this part. Later we got additional video from this area. Once again, the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians, and lots of episodes published by the 100th Territory Defense Brigade, and one of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point. Additional black was colored in Russian favor, and the most important updates are coming from the west, from the eastern Toretsk. In this video we can see a number of FPV drone attacks on the edge Russian positions in this part of the city, and based on this video we have adjusted these blocks in Russian favor. So there was a very long operational pause in the Toretsk direction, but when the Russians destroyed, or the Ukrainians destroyed, the high-rise construction on the territory of the coal mine Toretsk Vuhledar, the Russians resumed their offensive and just during one day captured significant territories. Obviously, the Russians are moving further, and during the next days we're going to receive more and more updates. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction. The Russians managed to improve their positions to the west of Kalinovka. We got this piece of news based on this video that was published by the Ukrainians. In this video we can see a number of FPV drone attacks on the Russian positions. Now let's talk about the Kupyansk direction, and telling the truth, we received significant number of updates exactly from this territory. We are going to begin with the north in Kupyansk direction. If you remember, if you were watching the previous video, we were talking that according to pro-Ukrainian mappers Deep State, the Russians launched the biggest offensive operation with the purpose to cut the Kupyansk direction physically in two. The Russians were attacking the villages of Kolesnikovka. The Russians were attacking the village of Kurakhove, but the Ukrainians are saying that this attack was repelled. At least that was reported by Deep State. And we were waiting for some geolocations, for some updates to understand whether the Ukrainians are telling the truth or not. And today the Ukrainian sources published that video. And in this video we can see this that Russian biggest offensive operation with the use of more than 50 armored vehicles. The Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian FPV drone operator groups Achilles published the video of how they were repelling the Russian attack. Significant number of FPV drone strikes, lots of vehicles were destroyed, tanks, personnel carriers, fighting infantry vehicles, different engineering equipment, lots of things were destroyed. But when watching this video, few important things that would like to know, point your attention. During this video we will not see even a single attack on Russian personnel, or maybe we're just few and they are not noticeable. So which means that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt. Then the Russians abandoned the equipment and vehicles and took under control different fortifications and the strongholds. And this group of FPV drone operators summarized their video, summarized their attempts to repel Russian attack, and they're saying that during that Russian attack they managed to destroy 6 tanks, 6 tanks were damaged, 4 tanks were destroyed, and don't forget we are talking about 49 vehicles that were involved in this attack. Then 2 personnel carriers were damaged. Then 9 personnel carriers also were damaged, and just 2 personnel carriers were destroyed. So summarizing everything, the Ukrainians managed to destroy just 6 vehicles of 49 that were involved in that attack, and just 17 vehicles were damaged. It doesn't mean that they were destroyed. Most likely the Russians have already evacuated them by the evening of the 27th of September. They will repair them and then they will use them once again. Anyway, just a small percent, just 10% of vehicles were destroyed or damaged by the Ukrainians. Most likely the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. We are waiting for additional updates. And summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians managed to get a little bit closer to the Ukrainians' positions in Kurakhove and Glushikovka. Furthermore, maybe the Russians managed to take under control some residential buildings, some high-rise areas or something like this. So this is another page, another turning page in the battle for Kupyansk, and most likely the Kupyansk direction was cut in two, the northern one and the central one. Probably the central one will be cut in two also during the next half a year. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kursk direction, where we haven't received almost anything. The most important update we received during the previous 24 hours is that the Ukrainians began the withdrawal process, and the first brigade to withdraw is the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. Furthermore, the Ukrainians are saying that they're not like withdrawing and leaving the territory completely. They're going to replace the elite brigades, the special forces, with the just territory defense brigade, which main purpose would be to hold the lines as long as possible. Obviously, all these brigades like 82nd, 80th, 92nd, the 22nd would be redeployed back to the Pokrovsk direction, maybe to the South Donetsk direction, with the purpose to stabilize the situation. And the territory defense brigade will have just one objective: to hold the lines, to pin down the Russian forces here and not to allow the Russians to redeploy their special forces, their powerful units also back to the Pokrovsk direction. So this is small maneuver by the Ukrainians, but obviously it will just give the Ukrainians some time. Obviously by the end of this year the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back to Sudzha itself, and probably by the summer they would abandon their positions here as well, of course, of the 2025. As for the Glushkova area, nothing special during the previous 24 hours, just the regular aviation or artillery activity from the Russian side. The Ukrainians haven't improved their positions as well as the Russians. No progress on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.